Just in time for a holiday reading, Eoin Colfer brings us Juniper's Christmas. It's a clever retelling of the Santa Claus story for middle grade readers. It turns out that being Santa isn't easy. And what would happen if Santa decided he's had enough and walked away from the job? Hi, I'm Dan Scunner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, I'll talk with Eoin Colfer about the inspiration behind Juniper's Christmas. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book, but this video is not sponsored. A little bit about Eoin Colfer. He's the best-selling author of the children's fantasy series, Artemis Fowl. His other notable works include The Dog Who Lost His Bark and the novels Half Moon Investigations, Airman, and The Supernaturalist. Eoin, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thanks, Dan. It's lovely to speak to you again.
Well, tell us about the inspiration for this new novel, Juniper's Christmas.
This is an idea I've had for a long, long time. The idea that what can you do with a character like Santa Claus that is so well known and he's so beloved and people have such expectations. What can you do to change that but still have him loved? So I want to present a character that is radically different initially from the Santa Claus we all know and love. Now, it's a little bit gritty and dark, I suppose. It's not Christopher Nolan level. It's not The Dark Knight. But he's had a tragedy. His wife has passed, and he's feeling very low, and he decides to quit his job and go and help people who are experiencing homelessness in a London park. So when we meet him, he's gone by the name Nico, and he has not told anyone that he's Santa Claus. But our hero, Juniper, she figures it out. And when she has a big problem of her own, she goes and she enlists a very grumpy, dour-faced Santa Claus to help her find her mother. And that's where the adventure begins. And that's what the important relationship is this elderly grump and this fantastic, young, enthusiastic, determined girl, and how in a way they heal each other and get back to where they want to be.
You opened the book by saying we're all familiar with the Santa Claus story, yet the story we're supposed to be familiar with is actually a new history of Santa Claus. And in this new story, you solve some Santa mysteries for us. For example, you solve the mystery of how Santa is able to deliver gifts to all the homes in the world in just one night. But you also point out that in doing so, there are negative personal consequences for Santa.
Yeah, but because for us it's a night, but for Santa Claus it's a year. So he has what's called Santa slow time, where once he gets into that bubble, time passes very quickly outside the bubble, but for him it's normal time. So he is away from his beloved wife for 40 years in all, and that takes a toll when you're away from your family. Even I'm on these little tours and I'm away for 2 or 3 weeks from my boys. And I find that really hard as time goes on. It was really hard when they were little kids because you would come back and they would look different. And you would think, oh my goodness, I have missed something there. And I would see a photo of my son, one time he had a broken arm and I wasn't there for that. I mean, it's different now. Now when I go back, my son Finn will just have another tattoo. And I will be glad to have missed that, but in those days it was quite sad. And so poor Nico he's been away from his wife for 40 years, and when she falls really ill, he feels so guilty about that. He feels I could have had an extra 40 years with my beautiful beloved wife, and instead I was gallivanting around the world in a sleigh, giving gifts, and a lot of the times those people didn't even want those gifts. They were like superfluous stuff. So he just says, you know what, I'm out of here when his wife passes, and he goes down to London. And his wife had a degree in helping the homeless, and she has some theories about how you could actually solve that problem. So he thought, I will take up that baton. I will help the homeless on the ground. I have a little bit of magic left. I can help people. And I do not want to talk to any kids. I do not want to see any kids. And that's when Juniper shows up and say, guess what? I'm a kid and I need some help. So yeah, there's a lot. Maybe people aren't used to seeing a grieving Santa Claus. But it's my job then as a writer to bring him back to his former self. I don't want to say glory because helping homeless people is a very glorious thing. But Juniper, she brings hope back into his heart for the future of not only children but humanity. So yeah, it's a nice, sweet story. Usually when you finish my books, you might have a nasty little chuckle because they're so sarcastic and brittle. But this time, I think you might close the book and have a little smile and a little more hope, because a lot of kids are anxious nowadays. There's a lot of things to be anxious about.
And Juniper is a special girl from the beginning of the novel. She's intuitive, she senses things that other kids might not. And not to
Yeah.
give away too much, but as the novel progresses, she becomes even more so. So I'm curious, how did you come up with her character and envision her abilities?
Well, I think I was inspired by some of the great female heroines in history and that in literature, sorry, and from people like Anne of Green Gables to Pollyanna, just these determined, bright, magnetic, wonderful girls who just make everybody's life better who they touch. And I always loved them. And that's a magic in itself. So she already has this magic where everybody who knows her really likes her. And it's not because she wants to be liked, it's because she genuinely is a nice person who helps out other people. And I've seen that as a teacher, I've seen that so many times with girls, especially. They just come into the classroom and it brightens up for everybody. So that's the girl I picked. She's kind of an amalgamation of all the girls I've taught. I was a teacher, middle grade teacher for 15 years. So Juniper is like a blend of all these wonderful characters. And then in the end, of course, as you said, she kind of manages to hijack some of Santa Claus's polar magic by accident. And so she finds herself in the unusual situation of being a stand-in Santa Claus. And I think Nico probably has a little professional envy, and that definitely pushes him towards coming back. Maybe he comes back. You can probably guess because it's a Christmas book, what happens in the end. But the fun is, how do you get to that point?
Another thing that I enjoyed about the novel is that you explain some of the magic that's involved with being Santa and some of the technology that the elves use to try and find Santa when he's hiding out in London. And I confess I'd also love to have a pair of Santa's boots that automatically adjust to your feet.
Yeah, I suppose they were a little bit inspired by the Back to the Future that Marty McFly had, his boots that just clamped onto his feet. So as kids, we all wanted those. I suppose I wasn't a kid. And when that came out, I was in my 20s maybe. And we just, oh my goodness, imagine if you didn't have to do your laces. Because that's such a chore having to do laces. So Santa's boots, yeah, they're amazing. The important weapon in his arsenal is the Santa's sack, because it's not just a bottomless sack; it's kind of an interdimensional portal. As much as I want to portray Santa differently, I'd like to do everything around Christmas differently. So, how does the magic work? What are the limits of the magic? What can you do if you have that magic? What do the boots do? What does the sack do? How can the reindeers fly? So, as a young reader, 40, 50 years ago now, I always wanted to know how these things worked. And I was never happy when a book just had this magical solution right at the end. So everybody's in horrible trouble. And then one of the fairies says, oh, actually, I can make us all invisible. And it seemed to me like a little bit of a cheat when you don't set that up earlier. So I just wanted to set up everything. And I wanted to explain to all the kids who are like I used to be, this is how this works. Now, a lot of my science would not hold water. I don't think I'll be winning the Nobel Peace Prize or Science Prize, but kids are, if you give them a reasonable explanation, most readers will say, okay, I'm accepting that grudgingly. Let's move on.
Well, during the course of this novel, Nico and Juniper have a couple of enemies that they struggle with. And hopefully, again, not giving away too much, but one of them has a redemption arc in the novel, and the other, well, they remain totally unredeemed by the end of the story.
There's two main protagonists. One is the park keeper, and he wants to not shut down the park, but clear all the homeless people out of the park. And actually, he wants to incinerate all the donations that people have made over the year to make their lives a little bit harder. But we find out that he's not as stern as he lets on to be, and that he's made a series of bad decisions. And just meeting with Nico as Santa Claus, he has a real revelation where his life went wrong. And that's one of my favorite arcs in the story, when this guy Carnegie just goes from being a bitter guy who's like locked into that life path, and he realizes, you know what? Just like that, I can decide right now I'm going to be nice and I'm going to help Juniper. And his life it's like flicking a switch. It changes and he becomes a good guy. Now, the other baddie is Miss Trude Madden, and she's a very dodgy business lady who decides if she can get Nico's bag and boots, she can franchise Christmas and she can make a lot of money. And as you said, she is not redeemed. So she is determined right the way through to look after number one, and number one being herself. She's quite a funny character. I do like a good villain. My favorite villain, I suppose, would be Captain James Hook, who, even though he's so bad, he is so entertaining. I suppose Darth Vader is like that, and for the older people listening, Hannibal Lecter is a bit like that. Even though you know they're terrible and you shouldn't root for them, you can't help but find them fascinating. And I always loved the parts when Darth Vader showed up in the movies. It was a real highlight for me. And the James Bond villains, of course, I always love the James Bond bad guys. And I would like to see Miss Trude, in among those characters. And they're great. They're such great fun to write. I had to fight not to put more in because they shouldn't be a main character, but they're just wonderful fun. And they're so bad and they can do such horrible things that I hope people who read the book will enjoy those passages, but not too much.
Now, Owen, you mentioned earlier that homelessness is one of the issues you raise in the book. What does your book have to say about homelessness and what can be done about it?
I think I did a book recently which featured migrants coming across from North Africa to Europe. And so I did a lot of research on that, and I worked with a homeless charity in Dublin called Focus Ireland. And what we learned was that just the percentages of migrants who end up on the street. But I think the greatest takeaway for us was you can't just blanket everybody with the same term. There's so many reasons why people end up in this situation. And I read a quote once that said, we're all like 3 meals away from being homeless. And it's a terrifying statistic. So everybody has their story. And sometimes it's tragic. Sometimes they have problems living indoors. There's so many reasons. And what Nico wants to do is to help people on the ground who are experiencing that. And what I wanted to do was to show you this character and say to you, do you like this character? And people will. And I said, well, that person is homeless for this reason. So really, all I would like is for the young people reading the books to just maybe open their minds. And when they see somebody who's living rough, there could be so much tragedy behind that, and there could be so much you can do to help. There's a lot of gift drives on a Christmas where like a pair of warm socks is a huge gift, because sometimes kids think, well, I can't do anything. I'm a child. I'm 10. What am I going to do? But it's all about attitude, awareness, and small things. And if you do want to do something, every city I've been to in the States, and every little town almost, will have a service or a charity or an office where if you want to do something, books are a great thing. You can give a book, and in fact, the publishers, Macmillan, of this book are running a program where there's a special, you can download the postcard on the Macmillan website, and if you fill that in, Macmillan will donate a book to a person in a shelter or a person who doesn't have access to books. It's wonderful. So stuff as simple as that to make their life just a tiny little bit better. No one expects a child to go and build a house for someone and put them in it. That's impossible. But what you can do on a daily basis is help out a little bit the way that you can do it. I mean, I can do more, I suppose. I'm a successful writer. I can work with a charity. I can donate. But anybody can do something, and just doing something, anything, will reduce your own anxiety. It's the same with climate. We did a book about climate, and a lot of kids in America, especially, have climate anxiety. Now, this is not about science. We're not saying this is what causes or that's what causes it. We're just saying if you're worried about it, you can do this, And that when kids are doing that, it can be as simple as planting a seed, or paying $1 and you can plant a tree in a forest. They feel so much better. I think you always feel better when you're being active, rather than just living inside your own head and thinking about it.
The book is Juniper's Christmas by Eoin Colfer. And Owen, I can see that this book could become a Christmas classic that you read every year. But you also ended this novel in such a way that I could see sequels and more adventures with Juniper. So do you have plans for more books?
I would love to do some more. I mean, and if the public warms to Juniper, I definitely would do another one. I have an idea for another one. So I'm very fond of her. Usually, sometimes when I'm finished a book, I'm like, okay, that's that. And I just close the drawer and it's gone. But Juniper, I've left that drawer a little bit open, so she could come back. I think there's more adventures there. And if people agree and if I get enough comments or letters, I would definitely do that.
Owen, who do you envision as the primary audience for this book?
I think the core audience would be what's called middle grade. So they would be around the age of Juniper herself, which is 11. But I do think it's one of those books that could cross over to everybody. And as I said, if I meet a family and two or three generations of the same family have read the same book, I would consider that to be the greatest compliment that I could receive.
And I can testify to that because as an adult, I've enjoyed reading this story as well. Once again, it's Juniper's Christmas by Eoin Colfer. Owen, thank you very much for talking with me today.
We'll have to go for another one next year, Dan. It's becoming an annual event at this point.
And I'll look forward to it. Now, if you'd like to purchase a copy of Juniper's Christmas, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.